Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third in the series of the Hyde Lecture series. And this particular lecture, we have the pleasure of collaborating with the AIA of Nebraska. So tonight, our speaker is part of that collaboration, and myself, as the former chair of the Committee for Engagement and Enrichment, and my colleagues selected lecturers, and we're happy to support this lecture on behalf of our college. And so I'm delighted tonight to be able to meet, to meet as well. We have just met, didn't we? Yeah. Anne-Marie Duvall Decker. So I'll just give you a brief introduction of her bio, and then we'll hand over to you. So Anne-Marie, she's a founding principal of Duvall Decker Architects, located in Jackson, Mississippi. Duvall Decker is an expanded design practice whose work includes architectural design, community planning, and real estate development, along with facilities maintenance. The firm has been honored by many peer-reviewed design awards and been selected for national design excellence projects, such as the new federal courthouse in Greenville, in Mississippi, and the new Springdale, Arkansas Municipal complex, and that's with the Walton family, who are quite an enlightened client, as it turns out, among many others. The firm's work and approach has been highlighted in publications such as the New York Times, Dwell, Architect Magazine, the Journal of Architectural Education, Houses for All Regions, which is published by the AIA Custom Residential Architect Network, Oxford American exhibits, and exhibits as an AIA design for the decades. In 2017, the Architectural League of New York selected Duvall Decker as one of the emerging voices, and in 2019, the firm was highlighted as a game changer by Metropolis. Anne-Marie is recognized as a contributor to the advancement of the profession. She served as a long-term board member and past president of the AIA Mississippi, and is currently chair of the AIA Trust. Anne-Marie is often invited to share the firm's work and her experience as a lecturer, a critic and a teacher, and a design juror, and most recently serving on the jury of the 2018 AIA Institute Honor Awards for Architecture, and as a selection committee member for the Architectural League of New York, America's Round Table. I guess we have to add to that tonight you're going to be whisked off to the AIA Nebraska Gala to present the awards as well. So that is, that brings it right up to date, I hope. I hope there's nothing else
have to add that to the end.
left out in that introduction, but we want to give you as warm a welcome as possible, even though winter is setting in here in Nebraska, but welcome to the university and welcome to our college, and we're delighted to have you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, everybody hear me? I apologize ahead of time. I've got a lozenge in my mouth and need to keep one in there to avoid coughing if at all possible. But I'm fully vaccinated, and you always have to say that these days, and in good shape. So thank you, David. I sure appreciate that introduction. Thank you, Tom, for bringing me here today and letting me see a little bit of the campus and so forth. And thank you, Jason, for inviting me. And thanks to Sarah Kay, who's with AIA Nebraska as well. And she's a former trustee with me, so I've known Sarah for some time as well. I'm so glad to be with you here in person. I thought we weren't going to be in person again, so good to see actual faces in the room and talk to you directly and be on your Hyde lecture series. Maybe we can feel a little bit of post-pandemic feeling. We're back in a lecture together, so that's something good. So I'm going to talk to you today about our foundations, Duvall Decker's foundations. We started the firm in 1998. My partner, Roy, and I. Is that better? Can y'all hear me a little better? I was hearing echo. Good. With a really sort of naive but simple, hopeful goal that we might create a firm that would have public impact. And I say naive and hopeful because starting our firm in Mississippi, we had several leaps of faith that we had to go through. We were fortunate early on. We had a colleague who, we weren't fortunate about his illness, but we were fortunate he asked us to help him with some public work when he was ill. So we were doing a 14 classroom building in the first few months of our firm. So that took us off into public work pretty early in the process, universities, state agencies, and so forth. But even as our projects and clients have changed, that's our constant goal, is to have a public impact no matter who funds the work, no matter what kind of project it is. So when I say several leaps of faith, the first one for me is this gentleman's profession that we're in, at least historically. So I knew as a woman, I was a minority, particularly among firm owners. I knew this most when I walked into my first AIA Mississippi meeting and just looked like this the whole time, like this is it. These are my colleagues. But what I really hadn't considered yet was that term gentle that came before men. And that really meant that most of these men already had family money when they were practicing architecture. And I think that has a ripple effect all the way to today in the difficulty of running architectural practice. They didn't really have to work to do that work. So neither Roy nor I had family money. We didn't have the social connections in Mississippi. The other leap of faith is really starting an architecture firm in the state of Mississippi, which is not known for its architecture much past those plantation houses and so forth, which is a nostalgia that we try to stay away from. But what is true, and I think this has a lot to do with the theme of the lecture, the post-pandemic future, the things that came to light in a lot of areas in the country have always been utterly present in Mississippi. The inequities, the racial strife, and for us, a consistently depressed economy, and I can't state that enough. We have moments of wealth in Mississippi, but they're largely overwhelmed by the sort of consistently depressed economy that we live in. But what's also really great about Mississippi is the way that humans have dealt with those struggles. And they have done the most beautiful things. They've had the most beautiful responses. And these are people in the past and people's works who we've read, and artists and civil rights heroes, lots of Pulitzer Prize winners in Mississippi. But it's also alive in the civil rights workers who are still doing that work in Mississippi, and we get to meet and work with them every day. So when I say I'm going to talk to you about our foundations, they really are the collected sayings that we've had in the firm. That's for lack of a better term, we call them foundations. They're kind of simple reminders, they're bold criticisms, they're high aspirations. They're really a mixture of a lot of things. Our first employee, Betsy Hewitt, started writing them down, just the things that we would say over and over again in the course of doing the work, and they've grown and they've gotten large in number. I think what's interesting about them is sometimes we live up to them, and oftentimes we don't live up to our own foundations as much as we try. But we see the practice of Duvall Decker as a long sort of arc of work. Every project is certainly distinct and has its challenges, and you as students are very focused on, you may work on a group project, but it's very focused on you and the work and this single moment in time that you're trying to figure things out. But what's great about the architectural practice in general is that you can see it as a long search over your whole sort of career. And that's how we see the work of Duvall Decker. And it's not just an individual search, it's a group search of all the people that we work with together over the years, not just our clients and our consultants and so forth, but all of the staff who we've been fortunate enough and privileged enough to work with over the years. Really talented group of people They have diverse perspectives, and they have diverse experiences and skills. But I think what's common among them is they all, along with us, share this keen awareness of the consequences of the work that we do in the lives of others. And that requires a bit of imagination beyond the sort of day-to-day. You imagine all of the ways that your work affects other people's lives, and that's really what we share. We also, one of the foundations is the best idea wins, which is true. No matter who comes up with it in our office, anybody can change the course of a project or the work along the way. So I'm going to talk to you just about a few of these foundations, just talk about the work through the lens of these foundations. I think foundation number 4 lives in some degree in everything that we do. It's a critical observation, but it's also a hopeful proposal. Our culture is quick and really consumed by language and concepts, and that can be really exciting and enjoyable, but we really believe for an activity of making a thing that is going to last for so long, we really need to focus on trying to find some pre-verbal therapy in the work, in the forms and the spaces that we do. So built form is an enormous investment, and as such it has a large amount of authority in our lives. Projects are built upon the authority of an owner. It could be a single person or a business entity or an institution, but it's really an architect's responsibility to protect that health, safety, and welfare of everyone. And those are not always such easy words to figure out how to do. It's easy to think about function or life safety. It's also easy to think about meeting our budgets and hitting our clients' pro formas. But when you're really thinking about health, safety, and welfare, you're realizing that we are the stewards for all the people who can't sit at the table of the project team in that moment. And that's kind of how we see that responsibility. So from our earliest projects, we've been trying to transfer that inherent authority in built form to individuals, to the individuals who encounter and inhabit the work that we make. In the Benny G. Thompson Center at Tougaloo College, these questions of authority were overt. The American Missionary Association started and founded Tougaloo College, and that was their overt mission, to transfer authority to individuals, to freed slaves and underserved groups through education, give individuals authority through education. And even though the school was founded on a slave plantation, the Bodie Mansion, John Bodie was the slave owner and the owner of the foundation. At Tougaloo, who has a motto, where history meets the future, this is really true. This mansion still sits on the agrarian center of campus, and they bring everything forward. They're not erasing anything from the past. So the Bodie Mansion claims its authority on the land around it, and it does this through its form. It occupies the highest point of the land on the whole campus. It's on a raised plinth above the ground. It's symmetrical and marks its center with a tower, which makes it the tallest building on the plantation, allows the owner to survey his whole property, and for all of those on it to feel surveyed at the same time. Its proportions are grand. So each opening in the mansion over on the right is taller than any person. So you're standing, you feel small when you look through or walk through those openings. And the porch would have had significant limited access. You know, only if the family invited you to the porch would you be allowed to use it. So this is the small number 1 on the right. It's a larger portion of the plan on the right and a smaller scaled version of the whole campus plan on your left. So the mansion is number 1 in the middle, and the red building to the south is the former site of Beard Hall, which would harbor civil rights leaders and make new ones, and I'll talk to you more about that in a moment. But that became the site for the Benny G. Thompson Civil Rights Research Center on Tougaloo's campus. Just north of the mansion, you see the H-shaped building. That's an industrial arts building, Holmes Hall, and was really a sister to our building as well. And then across the way, you see in the middle of the campus green, Woodworth Chapel, which is a historic building where all the civil rights leaders came and talked at Tougaloo College. So let me talk a little bit about that Beard Hall, that former Beard Hall, which was the site of Benny G. Thompson Center. It was the place where Ernst Barinsky had his social science seminars, and that's Ernst Barinsky looking very pensively in the upper right-hand corner. He was a German-Jewish immigrant who came to teach at Tougaloo and made his home there. And he brought civil rights leaders from all over the country to Tougaloo, had them speak to the public in Woodworth Hall, but also had them talk and meet with the students and help them learn about history and social science, and also about the nonviolent protest of the civil rights movement. So many protests were planned and initiated from Tougaloo's campus because it was just north of Jackson, and it was kind of protected agrarian with the woods around it just north of town. So it was a kind of a safe haven for where these activities could be planned. So in contrast to the formal authority of the mansion, Benny G. Thompson shifts that authority to the individuals through the way it is formed. There isn't an empty center, no imposing, all-seeing tower. There are multiple centers accessible to all and visible to one another. The shape is asymmetrical and engaged, not risen above the landscape. The entrance isn't an imposing, opaque central figure. It's a transparent corner that's slipped into the porch. And the porch is a long, shadowed invitation to linger along the campus green. So this is the first academic building built at Tougaloo since 1959, so there were a lot of needs. Art classroom, lecture hall, art gallery, conference center, and each of these occupies those multiple centers that you saw in the plan. The halls and the corridors have been widened to create margins where students can claim their space, even climb up on the building, sit upon it, like literally claim the space that they're in to study, to have discussions, and to look into and across the building, or to occupy a prospect over the land and to see back, unlike that favored prospect of the tower and the mansion. Now, foundation number 4 says, let me check myself here, that we should challenge the conceptual bias of our time. As we have learned from artist Robert Irwin, this is someone we've, over time, spent a lot of time trying to see his work and reading his writing. If you name a thing, it tends to short-circuit your experience of it. Once you have a name for it, you're no longer sort of contemplating it, trying to understand it. So over the years, we've consistently avoided any narrative or concept-driven content in our work. We think that in that way, we might have the potential to engage you in the phenomena of the environment that's acting in, on, and around the work. So when President Beverly Hogan asked us to display the college's civil rights photography collection in the building, it's an understatement to say we were concerned about having to do something that we had never wanted to do. We would try to not to do in all possible ways, not to have any narrative content in the work. So, and as you see, this is one of those civil rights photographs. The content is powerful. So we knew that the spatial condition couldn't and shouldn't try to overwhelm that content, but it did have the possibility to amplify it. So the device we used was threshold. These are aluminum-clad pauses between each wing of the building, so The building is a U-shaped plan. Each wing was connected on all floors by these thresholds. And these larger-than-life images are pressing in on you from both sides of that threshold. And the idea, really, the design proposition is that it is possible to make that content actually present and palpable by the spatial condition that acts upon it as well. So at the opening of the building, which is now, believe it or not, a decade ago, it seems like no time, there are wide open spaces and food and drinks out in all the big spaces outside of these thresholds. But the civil rights veterans and the new students and alumni all crowded into the vestibules during the opening of the building. Now, I don't know what that says about our proposition that we were making discomfort palpable, because they all wanted to spend time in the thresholds, but it was humbling thing to witness. So like Tougaloo, like the Benny G. Thompson Center at Tougaloo, the Mississippi Library Commission was an early exploration of Foundation Number 4 as well. It too has a pause and move multiple center plan and section. It too attempts to transfer authority to the individuals. And Foundation Number 4 challenges us to create surprise, joy, wonder, and desire. So this site was sort of on an office park site. So it was a little more suburban in nature and not as agrarian. And the character of the site was sort of best seen through the trees and the shadows that covered a lot of the area of the site. So our goal was to have the smallest possible footprint so that we could keep the trees close to the building and project the light and shadow onto the surfaces of the building. Sorry about that. So architecture is probably more than other art forms. I mean, all art forms are experienced through space and time, but architecture is the one that is most experienced through space and through time. And I believe, like my teacher, Chris Risher, that it is possible to create desire by cultivating curiosity in the movement through that space. So here you might invite with the warm sun or the cool shadow, depending on the weather of the day at the entry to the Library Commission. And then you reveal a bit of the warmth beyond. And then when you move even closer to the building, it's concealed again, and you're distracted a bit by this opaque patterned metal. And then when you enter, the warmth is again a surprise. And you are welcomed with color, light, and shadow. And you're invited to pause. As I said before, it's like a pause and move plan. But there's also an inner horizon, the ability to see beyond, to see a slip of light into the interior courtyard or up to the main reading room that invites you to move on. So if there is a primary center in this building with no centers, it would be this lawn that's actually outside of the building. So one of the things we thought about was how the building would be built, and we needed to think about that if we really did want to keep those trees close to the exterior of the building. So this is not only the sort of central lawn of the facility, it's also the place where the crane sat, and the building was just wide enough and the building could be constructed by that crane sitting in the lawns. It's the one place we cleared, and then we were able to do what we hoped, was keep those trees nearby. And it's also a sort of second center because it is the extension of the main lawn that comes to the north here, that comes into the main reading room of the space. Like at Tougaloo, the margins are widened to be claimed by the users of the building. There are also places to cultivate the character of our southern sunlight. It's one of our greatest gifts in the South, was our southern sunlight. So highlights and shadows repeated in the patterns, overlaid with the dappled shadows of the trees nearby. So if a thing is the same, but also different from the last time you had encountered it, and this is again that Robert Irwin idea, it's possible you can foster the curiosity to understand the difference. And the difference is those phenomena acting in and upon it. You may be able to awaken us to that difference. So the buildings and its spaces, if they are engaged in that phenomena, then we are engaged in them as well. So after building and renovating several buildings in the small town of Newton, Mississippi, we had also built a real trusting relationship and friendship with the superintendent of schools, Dr. Mina Bryan. She would call us for everything from how and when to change, to service the mechanical units. Why is it raining in the room beneath the mechanical units? How do I hire the best custodians? She just really relied on us to help her answer these questions. And that's the impetus for why we decided to start offering facilities maintenance, care of the buildings that we take care of. And we take care of buildings that we designed, like the Mississippi Library Commission, which we took care of for many years. We also take care of buildings that other people have designed. And what I think joins together our facilities maintenance clients is they're all people and institutions with real missions. And we see what we do as allowing them to focus on those missions and not be distracted by trying to take care of a building, which is something they don't know how to do well. So this is our maintenance specialist removing water from the aging roof of Operation Shoestring. In 2012, we helped this nonprofit with an organizational strategic plan and facility master plan. That means we were talking to them about their programming and also their physical facilities. And we were researching, having discussions with the community, really helping them try to focus. And what they were doing was too much. So what we recommended after that whole process was that they focus on their greatest strength, which was their after-school programs, as well as the parent support programs that piggybacked right on top of those after-school programs, that they really needed to just focus on that because that's where they had the greatest impact. We also were assessing their building at the time and getting them ready for a capital campaign and planning for that. So what we did until they could get far enough along in that capital campaign is watch the weather every day for about 6 years, because it took them that long to move forward. We didn't have a design yet, so it's harder to raise money when you don't have a design for what you're going to do yet. So as they prepared for that, we would watch the weather every day, and any significant or long duration rain, we were out here doing this, taking care of their building, until they had enough money for phase one, and then we could focus on designing the next phases and helping them with a larger capital campaign. And Operation Shoestring is really an apt name for them because they've always done so much with so little. They've been working in this neighborhood in Jackson, helping children and their families since the 60s, growing and making relationships, adding to their leadership. And we hope that our renovation is kind of like them. We've done a lot with very little in the renovation. And the front of the building is right along Bailey Avenue, which is a big and not so safe thoroughfare along one of the main thoroughfares in Jackson. So it's right here where we have a public meeting room, and this is the place that supports those parent support programs. So it's a classroom, but it's also a public meeting room for the parents. On the other side of the building, a simple transformation, which is a safe drop-off, a safe and covered drop-off for where the kids come and go from the building. We couldn't do much to the enclosure with our limited budget, but we could cut some very strategic openings into the building and make a margin where there wasn't one before. And in these margins, like in the other margins I've talked to you about, it's a place where you can be off from the activity but feel safe and able to claim an edge but see what's going on. in the bigger spaces. And then we really just opened up the interior so that there could be 3 main flexible spaces: classrooms, study areas, computer laboratories. But everyone, after you come in through that covered drop-off, this is just to the inside, this sort of theater in the round. It's the place that everybody, it's their sort of safe space. So they watch movies here, they read, they take naps, and it's that blue material that you see is felt. So when you walk into that space, it literally becomes quiet and you feel safer in the space. So it really is the heart of everything they're doing there. Everybody feels safe there. Now, at the time that we were doing this, Jackson Public Schools were still preparing for their next bond program. So these students were in some very dilapidated school facilities and places without playgrounds. So one of the donors said, basically, all I want to do is give them a playground that they'll make their eyes widen and when they walk onto it. So we can't take credit for the playground. It's all about this great equipment and everything. But we have seen those brightened eyes when the kids walk onto the playground for the first time. Sorry. So like Operation Shoestring, the Mississippi Center for Justice is another mission-driven client we've been privileged to work with over the years. They provide pro bono legal services throughout the state, and they do this in a way that is strategic. They're always looking for the systemic inequities that legal work can help correct. So here in the Mississippi Delta, we had worked with them on their Jackson office, but we also helped them sort of find the building and procure and renovate building here for their Indianola office, which is in the Delta. And in the Mississippi Delta, I don't know if you noticed on some of those maps, the things that coalesce along the Mississippi River there. The inequity, the poverty, it's palpable. It's really, you don't have to look closely to see it when you're in the Mississippi Delta. So this building was in the perfect place, just right across the street from the Sunflower County Courthouse. And it was a great place for them to do what they do, which is tackle education access problems in the Delta. For a place with such limited means, education will be that way to leverage forward. So it was a former pawn shop, believe it or not. That's a really good switch from a pawn shop to the Mississippi Center for Justice. It really needed to be transformed. We couldn't redo the exterior of the building, but we needed to find ways to communicate that community-centered mission of the Mississippi Center for Justice. So what we tried to do was make connections and build a story in the interior of the building. So to talk about that, I first have to talk about the founder of the Mississippi Center for Justice, Martha Bergmark. Her father was a professor at Millsaps College, and at that same time that we were talking about the things that were happening at Tougaloo College, and Millsaps and Tougaloo were partnering in some of those protest efforts and so forth. And so Martha was a child then, and that is sort of literally why she founded the Center for Justice. It was really formative for her. So while we were working on the project, we saw these tiles at Millsaps College, and they had taken them off of the building where her father taught. So we had no idea how we were going to use them yet, but we said to the college, can you donate these to the Center for Justice for their Delta office? And of course they did. Now coincidentally, it was a great match to, these are the balls that the cypress trees put off, and the color was just great. And that cypress break comes right into the middle of downtown Indianola. It's like just a block away from that courthouse that you saw there. And I see some smiles. Everybody likes Kermit. He's one of my favorite Mississippians. He's not from this swamp, but Leland is only 16 miles away, so that's where Kermit's from, right by Indianola in Leland, Mississippi. So it's important when you come here, you're vulnerable, you're coming for advice. It's important to have these private attorneys' offices, but we also wanted a common space that had some embodiment of the hopefulness that everybody is there for. So that's how we used those roofing tiles on that curved wall to sort of form the conference room and the shared common spaces that were around it. And what's great about this, we didn't have a name for what we were making. We were thinking of it as an elusive figure in the middle of the space. But as the Center for Justice has functioned here, this has become known as the Dragon Wall. And to understand that, you have to know that all of the high-powered attorneys in Mississippi send attorneys to do pro bono work for the Mississippi Center for Justice. So when they come in, they are just, fired and ready to go fight some inequity that they're helping their clients with. And so this has become known as the Dragon Wall, because this inside that conference room is where they come up with those strategies. So I want to take just a minute and talk about this sort of labor of love that was one of my staff members, Shannon Gathing's work during the construction administration of this project. We built this interior renovation for $35 a foot. I don't think we could do that, even begin to do that now, but it was a stretch even when we did this. And the contractor was a friend of the Center for Justice, which always sounds great, but never is really a great idea. And a good contractor, but he'd never worked in the Delta. And that is a whole other set of issues that he didn't know how to deal with, and how to get good labor from unskilled labor, which is the hard part of working in the Delta. So Shannon, after every single, first of all, when she's there on the field visit, she helps them solve problems, shows them how to do things that she can't actually do herself, but is able to show them how to do. And then she would come back to the office and write these field reports that were not just like, I observed this and I observed that field reports. They were instructive for not just the contractor, but the workers. So they got shared among the whole construction team. And what that allowed is everybody who worked here ended up being very proud of the work that they did, because she helped them be able to succeed in that. So I think of that as like a model of the Center for Justice's mission. You take this little bit of money and you go into this difficult situation, and you still end up with something exceptional. And I don't think that anybody has to know how we came up with why we brought the tiles in or the color or anything. They don't have to know that to kind of feel that when they come to the Center for Justice, they're gonna get some help. So again, I mentioned we couldn't do much on the exterior, but this is one more of those devices where we're trying to make something different over time and awaken you to the phenomena that takes place on it. So we, as you see, did nothing much to the exterior except paint it, and then we added these signs at each entry that are like sundials on the building. So for us, community planning is really a process of building up layers of understanding and information. We look at neighborhoods and communities through the multiple lenses: building condition, resident health, stakeholders, property values, transportation routes, everything that contributes, all of those conditions of a community. And then the consequence, I think it's the consequence of the kind of planning work we've done. We've ended up always having an affordable housing component of planning. It's always a great thing to lead with in a community, because it slows down, or it allows the growth without causing the gentrification in a community. So successful affordable housing is often community planning at its heart. In Greenville, like in so many towns and cities in Mississippi and around the country as well, years of white flight increase the footprint of the town. They annex more and more area while the population moves out of the middle of it. And the consequence is you don't have enough density to support the infrastructure and the services that the city needs. Businesses move out as well, and industry moves outside of town. And for the Delta, it's even worse. All of the family farms got transitioned into corporate farming. And so you've got this blight and emptiness in the middle of Greenville, which is like a problem of a large city, but in a small town. So the consequence to this neighborhood that we were working in is, as you can see it, the infrastructure is not kept up, the storm sewers aren't able to be cleaned, you lose whole houses to blight because people can't afford to live here. Believe it or not, let me just go back. These are generally pretty tiny houses, little small 3-bedroom houses. But the economy and the conditions of this neighborhood in Greenville means that people can't even afford these 3-bedroom houses. They can't afford a mortgage on those. And many of them don't need a 3-bedroom house. They might be a single person living alone, or a family with a single mom with one child. So the single family on a lot house really is no longer serving this neighborhood. The non-traditional families, the extended families, the small families, it's not really what this neighborhood needs. So we had a great opportunity. Our client, the city had shut down a park in the middle of the neighborhood, which was another devastation to the neighborhood, and our client acquired it. And what that gave us the opportunity to do was put back into the community that density it was losing, and also give it housing type diversity and options. So the thing that was great about that consolidated footprint, I mean, we had to consolidate the footprint to be able to afford to build because the soils are so bad in so many areas of Mississippi. That's our biggest expenditure, is on the foundation. So we kept the footprint small, and what that also did was allow us to keep the wetlands and let them expand even further than they had with the park, and also to make these walkways and connect back into the neighborhood from this development. So the way we had this one moment where we were building these houses, but we really looked at this, and we were working for the Greenville Greater Housing Authority. They're looking for other ways to increase this density as well. So we thought about this not just as a big concentrated development, but as a chance to do infill housing. And at each moment you would increase the density, whether you had one lot or two together. I'll show you how we thought about that. So that's that standard ranch house and the mass of it. And we started looking at how many units you could actually get into that same mass on the same property and increase that density. And then we worked to make that into groups of more diverse unit types, 1, 2, 3-bedroom unit types. And then, as I said, we went up with those to do that. And you can really sort of block and stack those to make multiple different conditions. So I think what happens with that is kind of exactly what I said before. The housing is successful because it's a community planning effort that's successful. What was transformed here was the economy and the social structure. So by increasing that density and bringing more money into the neighborhood, that's the transformation that was taking about. And by the way, we had all of these new affordable housing units as well. And I think it was radically different, but also just fits right in because you can see them just right beyond the existing housing stock. So, and this is something you're going to see in this project and the next project, is in the affordable housing sort of enclaves and groupings that we make, we're always trying to make these safe, shared spaces. So the other thing about the single family house that I'll talk to in a minute is it doesn't promote interaction among neighbors. So in all of the work that we do like this, we make sure everybody has their private porch. I'm sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. But they also, those private porches connect to shared entries and shared porches. The parking is around the exterior, so everybody comes together in a few shared entrances, which brings neighbors together and sort of, they're going to get to know each other as they enter together in these. And that's one of those individual porches. So before working in Greenville, we had sort of learned in a different condition with different variables the same problem of the single-family infill house just not being enough to revive a neighborhood. So on the left, you see the Midtown neighborhood. That's the entire footprint of it. Those are 200 Habitat for Humanity houses that had been added. The neighborhood recognized they had a problem of losing population and density, and blight had taken houses away. And they were trying to address that with these 200 houses. But even after all of those, crime was still rising, property values were still dropping. So the neighborhood got us involved in a planning effort. And we were fortunate to have the Jackson Housing Authority as part of that effort, ready and poised to make the next moves that we could make to help revive the neighborhood. So you see this is a standard plan. The public or common space across the front of the house just isn't really enough, and it's all compressed. So people in the house tend to, if they can't do two things in one space, they go off to their bedrooms. And then these are right on slab on grades, houses on the ground, so that when they go into their bedrooms, they tend to shut the blinds and they're not connected to their neighbors. So we did 2-story units, which changed that around a bit, gave more greater ratio of public space and put it on that ground floor and separate it so 2 or 3 different things could happen on this ground floor without everybody retreating to their bedrooms. But when they did go to their bedrooms on the second floor, they tended not to close those blinds all the time because they're up high and looking out over the neighborhood. So what we were doing there in the planning work, we were recommending zoning changes, but the neighborhood wanted to make change quickly. So we took these lots, these scattered lots that you saw there, and put the extended definition of duplex so that we could increase that density without waiting for the zoning change process. So these are split and shifted with just that little mechanical building umbilical between them. And what that makes is, again, these shared spaces in the front and rear yards of each building. And that effect of bringing the neighbors together is really palpable when you spend time here and you ask residents why they love living here. They talk about how safe they feel letting their children play in the shared yard, and that they tend to get to know their neighbors and know who's a stranger on site, us included when we come on site. But they say the word community, and I think they really feel like they have it there. And so one thing that's common in both of these projects too is very important to note, a 16-foot floor plate. What's great about that is it's a very economical length for wood framing on the floor framing and the roof truss framing. And it also gives you this great ability to bring natural light in from multiple sides deep into the footprint of the building and to create these loft-like first floor plans that happen both in this project and in the Greenville project. So one of those scattered sites, which you see up here, was along this park. And we literally did no upgrades to this park, but it is now a contributing park where it was a really dangerous place before. So it's, again, that moment where you can leverage what you're doing to do something else. The park was in great shape. It was just not safe until there were neighbors looking out for it. So listening to and building consensus among all the stakeholders of a project are sustained efforts of communication, research, and documentation. So as students, you do a few. I imagine you do some group projects in this work. When you get out into the practice, it's like one big group project sort of all the time. And so the ability to communicate what you're trying to achieve, remind people about it, and bring it forward becomes very important. people say, if you're a good listener, then you have a conversation with someone and you're able to say back to them exactly what they said to you. And I actually strive to do that in conversations with my family. But as architects, we know that's not really enough. I mean, we have trouble communicating between ourselves about what forms and spaces mean and how they do things. So you can imagine when we talk to our clients and residents and people in neighborhoods, they have an even harder time of that. So what they really communicate to us are hints of desires, really fragments of their hopes for the spaces that they want to dwell in the future. And we really have to figure out how to translate all of that into the work that we do. So after listening, researching, and observing, the following are some examples of what I want to show you, the tools that we use to show that we are listening, not just to our clients, but listening to the whole project team. We keep them going in the program all the way through the design and the design development. We bring everything forward so that it's a way to keep everybody on the same page. So at the Bedour Center, it's a place for adults with special needs in Senatobia, Mississippi. The spatial environmental needs of these intellectually disabled adults are really specialized, and we had a lot to learn before we started proposing design solutions for this group. But after we learned a lot, we realized it's quite universal, actually. The lessons we learned, these specialized lessons, taught us about spaces for everybody, really. It's quite universal. These residents come from their family homes to the Bedour Center. They may live the rest of their life here. So the Bedour Center has spaces for people who have never left their home for their first time out of their home. There's called transitional homes, all the way to senior living and assisted living and hospice care inside the Bedour Center. So they may spend the rest of their life here. So they build this place as a place for everything in their lives to be done. They have a lawn and garden center, and they have a packaging facility. So they have most of the residents have jobs and go to work every day, and then they have leisure activities and church. So they live a full life in this sort of one place connected to Senatobia, which is interesting too. They spend a lot of time, they're a part of the larger community of Senatobia at the same time. So we had to understand and really try to get into the middle of the day-to-day life experiences of the residents of Bedour, the special stresses they encounter, how they navigate spaces and engage one another. They have caregivers that come in and staff that come in every day. And how do we make all of those interactions possible without making them feel like an intrusion? So we learned that those special experiences and stresses can be managed through the design of the work. You can avoid sensory stresses. Organizational clarity can bring about a sense of sort of calmness because you know what's going to happen next. You can avoid social conflict in the way that one of the things we always said is never have a dead end in any of the spaces that you couldn't observe and sort of make your moment to go into. So we can avoid conflict, but also give everybody a choice, a moment where they decide they're going to enter a space before they do so. So the architectural program, was to make 2 5-bedroom houses with all the normal amenities. Every restroom is accessible, and then a shared living room, and then shared spaces between, and the small cart and bike parking. I'll talk to you a little bit more in a minute. So that as I said before, each plan is designed to prevent that conflict feeling, but also allow social interaction and allow you to feel that sense of comfort. And it's as we went through this that we thought about any home really is that, right? Any home is meant to make you feel comfortable, but also to put you in enough challenges with the people that you live with so that you're preparing for the larger challenge of the larger world that you're going outside of. So these are the two new houses, each side with an existing transitional home in the middle and the shared spaces between. So that strategy of understanding the movement in and through the space continues, makes the thresholds really important. Each building has its own sort of color palette, and then each threshold has its own color as a part of that palette. And that starts with the carved front porch, continues to the main entry, and into each room, and into each light monitor that serves the rooms that you see up there. Each one has its own color into the room. So we and the contractor and the owner, when these buildings were under construction, we all had to develop a new language. Everybody kept saying, "Are you going to have fireplaces in everybody's room? Because that seems really unsafe." Everybody was bombarded with these questions while it was just all framed up. So we all had to come up with a new name for what. Well, okay, these are natural light chimneys. And that was when we finally, everybody had struggled with what to say these things were. And that's when everybody finally, so we spread it around. Okay, it's a natural light chimney. And that'll take care of the conversation. So on the day, we were, architects, we don't often get this. We got to go for their open house day where they show the units, the residents themselves were the host for the open house. And they took us through all of their spaces, and they're just so proud of their home. And the thing I love the most, being that we do facilities maintenance, is they all talked about their duties to take care of the house, because they each one have different duties to take care of the house, and they were so proud of the way that they did that. Now, not all of our clients are, will tell you they're proud to take care of the facility, but these guys certainly were. And just a quick, this moment, each wing of the building comes together with this entry in the middle. And the reason for that really speaks to the whole campus itself. It's really like this beautiful, idyllic small town that they live in. They're going to work and to church, and they either walk everywhere, or they ride bikes, or they use golf carts throughout the community. So the building had to have two ways in. Either you're walking in through the front porch, or you're parking in the golf cart parking on the left here and coming in to the middle between the two wings of the building. So another special needs project that we have under construction is Cooperwood Senior Living, which is just outside of Jackson and Flowood, Mississippi. It's assisted living and memory care. And I'm not showing you a lot of this because it's still under construction, but it's just such a great partner to understand there are special needs with these residents as well, physical needs and memory needs. And again, we learned how common those needs are. They're special, but they're also universal as well. So in many ways, it's the same. You need to feel the ability to connect with your neighbors. You need to feel the ability to be connected with your environment. This space is on a sort of drainage way that kind of goes right up under the building. So these guys will be really connected to their environment. And then everybody needs that comfortable respite with great natural light and views out as well. Thresholds are important here as well. There's a lot of residents. It's a long plan. So one of the things we strove to avoid is that double-loaded corridor that is just oppressive in the space. So we worked and we mocked it up, and we worked really hard to get the hallway to be just the right width, and then widen those pauses at each 4 entries, so it's kind of like an interior front porch, and a pause to gather, and a place to sit if you need to, because you can't make it down that whole hallway, because that is true for some of these residents. So that in and out, the faceting of the facade has an effect on the interior of the rooms. Some of the rooms have more than one of these components in them. So you would see the slightly different orientation of the view out and a slightly different way that light comes into the space. And that makes a difference now that it's up and in construction. You can see that subtle difference between each room, which means a lot because these residents spend a lot of time in those rooms. So the way you bring light in and get a really great view out is one of the most important things you do. But on the exterior, it really becomes a musical pattern of overlapping rhythms because each unit type changes differently than each gable type changes. So it becomes a really beautiful changing pattern of sun and shadow. So Foundation 51, courthouses, public police stations, and city halls. We're back to now, we started out with a good bit of public work, and then we're fortunate now to be working on these sort of most public of projects. If you're in a courtroom or you're in the city council chamber, we're hoping that these public institutions are wielding the most benevolent of authorities on behalf of all of us. And imperfect though they may be, these forms really should embody a sense of the collective hope of the work that takes place in public buildings like these. So the Springdale Municipal Complex housed all three of these functions: a courthouse, police station, and a city hall. So like you saw with other projects as well, we start every project trying to understand the community that we're working in, the people that we're working with. It's hyper local. We do this when we work in Jackson. We do this when we work elsewhere. Understanding the people, what they do. In Springdale, it's really interesting story. Northwest Arkansas, because of the Waltons, is a thriving, and Tyson is a thriving area. And it's Bentonville, Springdale, and Fayetteville. And people say if you want to go hang out with your intellectual friends and learn a lot, you're going to go to Fayetteville. If you want to go see art, you're going to go to Bentonville. If you want to get your tractor fixed, you're going to go to Springdale, which is true of this community. And what that means is all the craftspeople live here, which is really cool for building in a community like that. All the subcontractors that are working on other projects live in Springdale. And interesting fact, Springdale has the largest population of Marshallese people in the country live in Springdale. So they take that really seriously, all of there, and they really try to leverage all of that skill for the benefit of all of their citizens. They already are investing in the downtown core. There are other developments, both private and public, happening here. The Razorback Greenway is being extended between Bentonville through Springdale to Fayetteville. They're opening up Spring Creek and making it a part of that experience. But one of the greatest things, in the lower right-hand corner, you see the image of the Emma Street dinner, which takes place on Emma Street. They set up a huge table all the way down the middle of Emma, which is the main street of Springdale, and invite everybody to come and have dinner at that table. And it's just, we feel like it's the most indicative thing about the Springdale community is that Emma Street dinner that takes place. So I want to share a little bit, again, part of what we're doing, that we're doing larger and larger work, is figuring out, I'm close, I'm a little long on time, I'm close, is continuing to figure out how to communicate the goals of the project and keep them going throughout the process and keep everybody on the same page. So for Springdale, the strategy was all about a limited budget. And what are we going to do about that? How are we going to bring all the stakeholders forward? We had to kind of use everything that we could to We had 125,000 square feet, and we didn't have the budget for 125,000 square feet of new construction. So we identified the other civic forms that would influence it. We figured out how we were going to phase it. We had a 911 dispatch that had to be 24/7 along with the police. That's why the criminal justice facility was phase one. And then what we really worked to do was make this main public arcade a street where everyone came to one place and had access to all of those services. And then that's all looking out onto the park and across to the Razorback Greenway. So that's the courthouse, which is also in phase one, and the city council chamber in phase two. And you see that it's not figured out architecturally at all here. We're really just setting up the strategy. And then we have a nod by the time we're through a schematic design. We're starting to figure out what the expression is going to be. And the main goal really was that each of those public entities and functions would have a formal expression along that arcade, that public street. And each one would have the natural light coming through the structure. And when we talk about authority and all the times we're trying to suppress that authority, these are moments where we have to both promote individual authority, but promote the importance of the function that's going on inside of each space. This is the courtroom. This is it right before the first day of court. It's still under construction, but they're already having court, of course, in there. And then there's a bit of that arcade that takes place even on the secure side, the entry of the police that is not on the front, and it's important to have that same civic feel for the police when they come and go from the secure side as well. Another way in which we're trying to bring light and shadow to the surface of the building, we do this here, did the Library Commission with smaller tilts, and you've seen it along the way. These are full two-story panels of precast concrete. And it's really dramatic on southeast and west, but this is the north side where you can actually see, there's no direct light here, but you can see the warmth of the light that's coming from the east and the blueness of the light that is coming from the north. So if you can get a north side of a building to come alive, we feel like we're doing pretty good. And just a quick one, this one's not under construction. Everybody keep your fingers crossed that we get it under construction. Yes, thank you. After the continuing resolutions of Congress get passed. This is the federal courthouse in Greenville, Mississippi. And the most interesting thing about this, and I'll do this quickly, is there's thousands of pages of guides that we have to follow. It's the Marshal Service, probation, the federal defenders, the judges, the court. There are three totally different three different circulation systems that have to happen, including three different cores. So defendants and prisoners have one circulation system, judges have another circulation system, and the public has another, and the two come together with those two. So the judges come to the public, the defendants come to the public. So everything about it wants to bury the courthouses in the middle of structures. And the least civic thing is a courtroom buried in the middle of a big building. So what we worked on early, and this is again, that trying to communicate the individual access to federal justice while communicating the importance of the court is all about the procession to that courtroom. So we pulled the courtroom out, and you'll see this in a minute, and we were very interested in how you slowly this is the courthouse in Virginia, the standard procession into the courtroom all the way to the judge's bench. And here, ours is sort of indirect and includes a vertical shift. But the fundamental difference here in the standard federal courthouse is those are the courtrooms and jury orientation, which are surrounded by glass and visible to the public, visible before you enter them. And then there's the bar along the back, which is all the administrative functions, and the bridge that connects them, and that bridge, that connection between them, is that procession to the courtroom and to the bench. Come up the stairs and you go back towards the courtroom, which you're seeing in front of you there. And then amazingly, when we went on our courthouse tours, I I was remembering old courtrooms with natural light and views, and new courtrooms, that is not typical. So we were able to bring back that ability to have natural light coming in and have views that come out, and I think that just is so important in a facility where such a life-changing, culture-changing decisions are being made. So I often wish I had a sort of elevator speech for what we're doing at Duvall Decker, but the reality is when you're doing this public work, we're trying to make this thing that you can't really describe. So we tell ourselves it's okay, we can't describe exactly what we're trying to accomplish in that way. But what we're trying to do in each of those moments is make the form not the thing, not this thing apart from us, but it is the transaction between us, the thing, the environment. It is the process of all of that happening in space, in time. And in order to promote that, we have to really promote imagination over fantasy, promote description over explanation, and try to promote inquiry over instruction. And those are the conversations that we have every day, trying to make this, going on this long arc of a search that is the practice. So I'm sorry I went long. Still, if we have time for questions, it'd be great.
But we have, I know that we have whisked you back to Omaha. I promised Sarah Kay that we'd get you back in time. It's not for good Tom. I just one or two questions. Yeah, okay, so I'm not responsible. So, question. State troopers are on break. Take questions at this time. I'm just on the microphone. Does anyone have a question?
It's not really a question, maybe a comment. Thank you so much for your lecture presentation. You mentioned pool at the end, but I think that the pool, the light, consideration of the materials, protection, where is the center, all those special things, all those things are in your work at the service of people and different, varieties of people. And I thought it was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you see opportunities for that in like different types of buildings, like maybe retail or things that are less obvious, or like types of buildings that you didn't cover in your presentation?
It's harder, I think, but we try to find it. The example that's coming to mind is as part of the Midtown work, we transformed an old retail building, and for that one, it was as simple as benches built into the facade of the building. So we transformed it, and it became a sort of entry to the neighborhood. That was the one thing we did with it, but not all retail spaces have that possibility. But we made the porch of the retail an inviting space in the shade. So there's always the people who are going to use the space who may not be the ones shopping and buying the goods. Always making a space for all the people who are encountering it. That's just a small example. But retail, you picked the hardest one, I think.
Thank you.
Mary, and thank you so much for coming in and speaking today. Wonderful work, overwhelming.
Thank you.
Truly engaging stuff. So
Thank
I
you.
want to just thank you on behalf of what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.